You guys are not even gonna believe it when I say that when I was 15, I almost became a stepmom. Yes, we did skip a few chapters, so let's start from the beginning of the book. Back in the day, in middle school, there was this new bad boy in town. And for the purpose of the story, his name will be Dean. So Dean was a little bit older, but he would date some of the middle school girls. A little sus, I know, but even beyond this man had a bad reputation. And I did my best to stay away from guys like him. That was until the second quarter of my sophomore year in high school happened. And while my mom and I were walking around Walmart looking for a pair of jeans, we ran into Dean's mom. Well, our mom started talking and bonded really well. And that's when his mom suggested that we would be a really cute couple. She talked about how much he's changed, so I went ahead and added him on Snap. And the insane thing is that we actually started having really good conversation. Like deep existential ones. But one night I was bored and started to creep on his Instagram account. And I came across a gender reveal photo. This man had a whole son on the way. And I accidentally liked the photo, and that's when I got a text from Dean saying, "Go ahead, ask me." So part 2 to me almost becoming a stepmom at the age of 15. So when he asked me about liking the gender reveal photo, I just decided to go ahead and play it dumb and be like, "What?" And then he tried to act like that text was meant for someone else. And then I go, "Are you sure you didn't want to ask me about your kid?" He was literally so embarrassed and thought that I would think of him differently. But he told me that him and that girl broke up, so I honestly didn't care. I was just like, so I could potentially be his stepmom. And he was like, "Yeah, I would actually love that." So we continue to snap and talk as normal and start to date. I caught feelings for Dean so hard. But one night when we were snapping, I got really excited and opened it up. And it was some girl. It said, "Who the F are you and why are you snapping my man?" I was like, "Me and Dean have been talking." And she was like, "I'm his baby mama and girlfriend." So I literally told her everything that this man had said to me and that he was in love with me. But then I blocked him on everything because I didn't want to break up their family. Ladies, if a baby mama is involved, always do that little extra bit of stalking to make sure they're really not together. Follow my Insta. Have you guys ever had just little random things go missing from your house? It happens a lot and you just don't really think anything of it. But what if those things started to show up at your doorstep? That is exactly what my stalker did to me. So as all scary stories start, I met a guy on Tinder. And for the sake of the story, I feel like his name should be Ted. So Ted and I really hit it off and dated for 3 months, and that's when he asked me to be his girlfriend. I of course said yes, but that's when I saw a switch in his personality. He became this very dark, controlling figure in my life and kept me from seeing any of my friends and family. Once I realized this was emotional abuse, I left. And he was eerily calm about the breakup, which was not consistent with his controlling behavior. And around this time, I started to get anonymous packages delivered to my house. And they contained stuff that had been missing from my home. I tried to brush it off, but couldn't help but think it might be Ted. But that's when I got a text from Ted's best friend saying that Ted had passed away in a car crash. So I ruled him out, but that's when more weird things kept happening. The anonymous packages kept showing up, and then I noticed a car would follow me everywhere I went. Storytime part 2 to my stalker sending me missing items from my house. After I got the text message that my ex had passed away in a car crash, I immediately ruled him out. Like, there's no way you can be dead and sending me packages. And then I started to notice anytime I would leave my house to go run errands, this one car was always there. They would always follow close or park next to me. And sometimes I would even think that I could see Ted, but I thought I was just imagining it because I was dealing with his loss. But then I started to get texts from a random number, giving me information about where I lived, what I was doing. So I obviously blocked it. And then hundreds of new numbers would start to text me, and I couldn't keep blocking them all. So I finally talked to my mom about it, and she made me go to the police. That's when the officers tracked one of the numbers back to Ted's house, which really confused me because I had already grieved his loss. But the officers let me know that he was very much alive, and they went to go arrest him and found him in my neighborhood in the car that I had seen following me, which was stolen and had photos of me all over it. If you guys have a story you want to share, follow me on Insta. The best thing to bring 2 girls together is being cheated on by the same man. So this is my best friend, and around the beginning of February last year, she got into a relationship with a man. And we'll go ahead and call this guy Bronson. So they had known each other for about 2 years prior and had talked on and off. But February of last year, they finally decided to get together. And he was like her ideal man. He was tall, Sagittarius, and had a country accent. And let me just tell you, he even charmed all of her friends. I straight up thought he was so good for her. That was until the bachelorette party. So she was a bridesmaid and I was a maid of honor in a wedding. And we noticed while we were out, her text messages got muted. And so we decided to look at his Snap location. And it was not where he was usually supposed to be. Spence texted him the next morning and was like, "Hey, did you cheat?" And he completely denied it. So we chose to believe him until he fessed up 2 days later. We literally found the girl's TikTok later that day. He said he wouldn't cheat on her again as long as she didn't cross state lines again. And that remained true for 2 months. Part 2 to my best friend meeting her roommate. So even though Bronson had cheated on her, they decided to go ahead and try to make things work. Sometimes people make mistakes in relationships and things can be fixed. 2 months went by and everything seemed fantastic. This leads us to our date night. So Spence and Bronson were both asleep, but then she woke up to his phone literally blowing up. She went over to go check it because Bronson wasn't waking up, and it was just one of his guy friends blowing up his phone. So being worried that he might be in trouble or some kind of danger, she went ahead and decided to pick up the phone. Well, a girl answered on the other end. And it wasn't just any girl, it was his ex-girlfriend. And she was just as confused as Spence was. So they were still seeing each other while she thought that Spence was just a friend and Spence thought that she had been totally blocked. But he had just changed her ID contact to one of his best friend's names so that she wouldn't question anything. We'll call her Ashley, and they decided to meet up to discuss everything. And long story short, they ended up kicking him out and moving in together. But if you want more details on that, we can give a part 3 and 4. Follow me on Instagram if you want to send in your story. Okay, so on my FYP lately, I've been seeing so many videos of like, watch my husband fall out of love with me, which is exactly what I watched happen whenever I went through my pregnancy with my boyfriend's child. So in December of 2019, I found out that I was pregnant and I was so excited. And my boyfriend was overjoyed. We literally had one of the best relationships during this time. But once COVID hit in 2020, I ended up getting laid off of work. He continued to work, but I felt like it was pointless for me to find another job just because I was about to have a baby and raise a kid. And in April, we get to find out the gender, and guess what? It was a boy. I was extremely happy, but then I just started to notice that he stopped caring. Like I would be like, hey, the baby is kicking, and he would just be like, okay. Completely monotone, completely blank face. Then June comes around and I ended up gifting him an iPhone 11 Pro Max. Since it was under my name, I had access to see who could text and call him. And I know a lot of his family's numbers, including cousins and aunts, but there was one number that I didn't recognize that stood out the most. And the messages between him and this number would not stop until 3 a.m., which is when he would go to sleep. So I decided to go up and ask him who is more important than me and his son. Storytime part 2 on my boyfriend cheating on me with his coworker and his ex. So his response to me asking who is more important than me and his son is, no one, babe. I just said okay, and a couple months go by and I go into labor. He's not even excited and doesn't even try to care. A few months later, and I see that number pop back up again. And I also noticed that there was an exchange of pictures going on. So I decided to call the number up and be like, hey, who is this? How do you know my boyfriend? And she responded with, who is this and why do you need to know this? Because I'm with him. I was bawling and I tried to confront him on it, but he literally denied it. And then he threatened me because I don't work that he would take my son away and get full custody. And because of all this crap, I just shut up and agreed to make it work for our son. And then not even a few weeks later, I see that number pop back up again and I lose my ish. Now, I don't condone violence, but the second that this man got home, I was so upset that I ended up punching him and he fell into the wall. I went through his phone and ended up finding out that he was also talking to another girl as well. So I whipped the phone around in his face and I was like, who is this? Storytime part 3 to my boyfriend cheating on me with his ex and coworker. Now that I officially have this man's phone, I can see everything. When I asked him who the first girl was, he was like, no one. And I was like, no, straight up, who is she? And he finally admitted that she was a coworker. So I go through his pictures and I see that they took selfies together, like really close selfies. And he also took a pic of her butt. There's literally a whole video where she's shaking it for him. I started bawling and I threw everything at him. I left the house for several days. We agreed to try to fix things again, but I'm taking his paychecks and messing around with his cousin now to get revenge on him. And honestly, him and his cousin look a lot alike. So if I ever were to get pregnant again, he wouldn't even question it. Also, if you didn't catch on, the other girl was his ex-girlfriend and she still reaches out asking him for money and asking him to move in with her. And even when we were trying to work things out, he would constantly think about leaving our family for her. If you guys have a story that you would like me to share on my TikTok, follow my Instagram and I'll show you how. So did you guys know that our typical search engines are only 4% of what we see on the web, which is like Google, Bing, Firefox? I'm going to be talking about some of the most popular websites on the dark web. So get ready because this is going to be intense. So here's a photo example just to give you guys an idea of what this looks like. At the top is the area that we do our research for school on, or stalk our exes, I don't know. And then 500 times larger than the surface web is the deep web. The deep web is filled with information that we cannot access, such as medical documents, iCloud, personal information. Like I obviously can't Google what your family history or intake forms say, so that's where this is stored. And then the dark web holds the last 6%. This part of the internet was created by the US Navy in the 1990s, and it was made so spies could share info without being tracked. Well, then the government decided to release it to the public. And you need the specific software to go to it called Tor, which stands for the Onion Router. It hides your identity and gives you access to non-surface web pages. And on this section of the internet, you can do things like buy people's credit card information, get counterfeit money, participate in drug trafficking, hire hackers and hitmen, and way worse. Okay, so this is part 2 to my series on the dark web. So all of these websites are listed in very long, hard to remember codes that change very frequently to avoid law enforcement. And instead of using .com, .org, .net, you use .onion. Well, one of the biggest websites on here is called Silk Road. This website is responsible for 1.1 billion in transactions in 1 year. It is a massive drug market. You can buy things like counterfeit money on here, also Facebook accounts to hack into, fake passports, stolen credit cards, and I may or may not know a few people who have gotten their fake IDs from there. Honestly, not uncommon. Now, there's also hitman websites on here as well. For example, you have something called Assassination Market. And y'all, this is insane. On this website, a victim will be added to a list of targets. Users will bid Bitcoin on when they think this target is going to die. The most accurate bidder gets the whole pot of Bitcoin. The problem is that many of these users start to just participate themselves so that they can win. Like they become the hitman, which is way cheaper than just hiring an actual hitman. But there are theories on who's actually responsible in controlling all of this. Welcome back to my series on the dark web. The big theory surrounding the hitman websites is that the government may still be in control of the dark web and be very aware of who is where, even though it appears that they're not. Because it was literally created by the government, how would you be safe from the government? And in actuality, the theory is that they may just be letting people do the dirty work for them. Like they're the ones who might actually be putting hits on people. But we will probably never know. The dark web goes so much deeper than this because of websites like Human Products, which sells food, belts, wallets, and clothing made from, you guessed it, humans. So I don't know if anyone's in need of a nipple belt, but this is literally the kind of things that they sell. Of course, there's even darker stuff like red rooms, cannibalism, and human experimentation, but I'm actually going to go into detail on that on my Instagram because I know if I post it here, TikTok will take it down. So go over there, go to my middle tab where my reels are, and you guys can see the most intense part of the series, but there's a fat trigger warning on those videos, just FYI. But you will get to see me take off this makeup look. Put a finger down if the guy that cheated on you ended up getting the other girl pregnant. God, I hope this is not something that we can relate on. Well, to provide a little bit of backstory, I met this guy that we'll call Logan at a bar. And while that should have maybe been a red flag, homegirl really thought she met her Prince Charming. He swept me off my feet, we exchanged numbers, and eventually decided to give us a chance. And let me tell you, the first year was a fairy tale. For months, we talked about having a baby. And eventually I ended up getting a positive pregnancy test back. So I was scared, but excited to give this to him. And when I handed it to him, honey, he just went silent. I asked him how he felt, and his response was, like I need to pee. Later on, I begged this man to propose to me because we were having a baby together, and he proposed to me with the cheapest turn your finger green ring. And I know these are fat red flags, but at the time, I just saw them as pink because I was giving birth to our son. Well, the second it was time to give birth to him, my fiance wasn't involved at all, to the point where the nurses were asking if the dad was in the picture. I was straight up alone. But now pay attention. One female friend that went on double dates with us often, named Tori, came up with my husband to check on me. Part 2 to my ex cheating on me and getting the other girl pregnant. So a little backstory on this girl, Tori. I knew her because we had gone on double dates with her and her husband before. I'd been to her house multiple times, she was also pregnant, and I was super excited for her. Logan always encouraged a relationship between us. Because we could both relate on being pregnant, we talked almost every single day until the end of my pregnancy. Logan and Tori talked every day, multiple times a day. But again, I just saw this as a pink flag. He would go visit her during lunch breaks all the time, but because she was married, I really didn't think it was a big deal. And I trusted Logan, right? So anyways, he ended up bringing her to the room, where she held my brand new baby in her arms and met my parents. I was also touching her baby bump and was super excited for her. Well, when it was time for her to leave, Logan walked her out. And they were gone for about an hour. But still, I didn't think anything of it. However, a few months later, I ended up getting a Facebook friend request from Tori's husband. However, I don't really check my Facebook very often, so it took me weeks to realize that he had requested me and sent me a message. And it said, let me know if you want to know how badly your fiance is cheating on you with my wife. Part 3 to my boyfriend cheating on me and getting the other girl pregnant. So after Tori's husband sent me this message, I still couldn't believe it. I thought it was just a joke until I looked at Logan and said, hey, Tori's husband texted me. As soon as I said that, his face dropped and he stopped talking, which solidified my fear, and my husband admitted to everything. I dropped my phone and just cried. Like, how many times had he left to go help her while I stayed at home pregnant? The amount of times he went to go visit her at lunch? And he even admitted that the baby that Tori was pregnant with was his. I ended up finding out that their relationship had been going on for 3 years, which was before she was even married to her husband and before Logan and I got together. And when we broke up, he ended up proposing to Tori with a much nicer ring. But ultimately, when she had the baby, he just abandoned that baby too. And to this day, he has not seen that baby and still refuses to see my son. I even tried to suggest a healthy co-parenting relationship between the 4 of us, and he couldn't even seem to do that. Tori and her husband ended up getting back together, and she's tried to reach out multiple times to apologize, but it just really doesn't make up for what she did. So the most terrifying thing about the Sally house is that nobody really knows if it's being haunted by a ghost or a demon. The Sally house, located in Atchison, Kansas, has a lengthy history of just terrifying owners, and has also been the source of 2 separate BuzzFeed Unsolves. And I really think that we should all go there ourselves. But first, let's get into the backstory. The Sally house was built between 1867 and 1871. It was built for Michael C. Finney and his family. This included his wife Kate and his 3 kids, James, Agnes, and Charles. And altogether, they lived in the basement while this was being built. But in the year 1872, Michael ended up passing away in the home. And years later, in 1906, his daughter Agnes moved back into the home. She got married to an engineer named William True, and in 1913, he also passed away in the home. Agnes passed away next in 1939. After this, several families moved in and out of the residence, and there wasn't a whole lot of incidents. But this all changed on December 31st of 1992 when the Pickmans moved in. Tony and Deborah Pickman, who were a newlywed couple and expecting their first child, had no idea what was. So when Tony and Deborah Pickman were moving into the new house, their dog, who was normally very calm, would start to freak out a lot. And to give a little bit of timeline, about January through June of 1993, they would experience things such as lights flickering, cold spots around the home, landline calls dropped, pretty typical haunting stuff. But this honestly seems just common for a home built in the 1800s. Tony had even joked about there being a ghost. Well, in June of 1993, their baby arrived. And this is when things went from a little spooky to terrifying. Electronic toys would turn on and off, the wind-up mobile above his crib would just randomly go off, and he would wake up almost every hour of the night. Deborah describing it as if someone was wanting to play with him. A neighbor actually ended up coming to them and asking them why they left their nursery light on throughout the night, when in reality their son had just been sleeping in their bedroom, so they weren't even in there turning on the light. Deborah's sister ended up coming into town to help with the baby, and she asked why all the baby's toys were on the floor arranged in a circle with backs facing each other. When the Pickmans came up to check in the nursery, they put all the toys back where they came from. They left, turned off the lights, and when they came back to check, they found both the lights on and one of the bears lying flat on his back, just to put the bear back on the chair, and found it on the floor again later. Tony's brother Greg ended up coming over with a camera and asked the spirit if it wanted its picture taken. He snapped a picture of the bear in the nursery, and apparently the bear spun around before their eyes. The grown men were panicked. They were freaked out, ready to leave the house. Deborah was packing up all their stuff while Tony strapped the baby in the carrier. And as he was leaning down to do this, he felt this sharp pain in his back. But because their priority was to get out of there, they didn't look at his back until they got to Tony's parents. Deborah picked up his shirt and he had 3 large scratch marks. So they decided to call psychic Barbara Connor. She came and told the family that the house was being haunted by a girl named Sally. She concluded that she was childish and bratty, but mostly harmless. She'd light candles to show that she was friendly, but she said that Deborah needed to be firm with her. But the reality was far worse. So there was 2 times Sally made herself known. On October 31st of 1993, Tony came home from work on Halloween and turned around to see a little girl standing in his kitchen. She was in church clothes and he realized he could see through her. And he made the connection that this was probably Sally. Previous owners to the house came to the Pickmans and said that their 5-year-old daughter had an imaginary friend named Sally the entire time she was living there. She would be scolded for doing something and she would blame Sally for it, saying that I didn't do that, Sally did, or Sally told me to do that. A photo was made of what Tony had saw and the girl confirmed that that was a Sally from her youth. But the next time Tony saw Sally, it was a horrible nightmare. He woke up to her reaching for him, but he kept finding back and she ended up turning into something that looked more like an animal. It had rotting flesh, worms crawling through it, and it growled at him. Incidences kept happening years after they moved out. Another family moved in and the woman used it for demonic worship, making everything worse. But I'm curious and want to go visit it. My boyfriend and I are on a road trip to the Sally house. Go watch the vlog on my YouTube. Just imagine showing up to your own funeral after your husband put a hit on you. Even though this sounds like a totally made-up scenario, this actually happened for a woman. In 2004, a woman named Noella Rakundo immigrated from Burundi, East Africa to Melbourne, Australia as a refugee. At the time, she was a mother of 5. She ended up meeting a man named Balanga Kalala. He was a refugee like she was and was currently working as a forklift operator. He had arrived in Melbourne in 2004 to flee a rebel army that had killed his wife and children when he was just 24 years old. Or this was his story that he told her. The both of them shared a social worker at the time. Kalala spoke English and Noella spoke Swahili, so the social worker would translate for the both of them. They ended up starting a relationship and moving together to Kings Park, which is in the suburbs of Melbourne, and they soon got married and had 3 children. This sounds like a completely romantic story, right? Well, things ended up taking a turn for the worse whenever Kalala began to suspect that Noella might be cheating on him. So what was Kalala's response to thinking his wife might be cheating on him without any proof? He paid nearly $7,000 to a group of men to kill her. Noella ended up getting news of her stepmother passing away, so she ended up flying back to her hometown for the funeral. This was January 21st of 2015. Kalala ended up calling her on the phone, and he instructed her to go outside and get some fresh air. And she was immediately confronted by an armed man who directed her to get into the vehicle. When she got into the vehicle, there was 2 other armed men waiting for her inside. They then blindfolded her, took her to a warehouse, and tied her to a chair. And instead of doing what they were hired to do, they ended up telling her about Kalala's plan. They had a personal moral rule not to kill women or children. So they let her know that her husband put a hit on her. She did not believe their original claims on what was happening, so they ended up calling Kalala, putting him on speaker, and asking what they should do next, and he responded with kill her. Noella was so shocked by this information that she fainted hearing his response. So this is when they came together to make a plan to get back. So because Noella didn't make it to her stepmother's funeral, her brother really started to worry. He called her hubby and asked him to send over money so the police could look into her disappearance. He did, and then on February 19th of 2015, the kidnappers dropped off Noella on the side of the road. They gave her all the evidence she needed to convict her husband of the crimes that he had committed, including a memory card. And they ended up telling her that she had about 80 hours to leave the country, or other people might not spare her life like they did. After this, she ended up contacting the Kenyan and Belgian embassies to help her get back to Australia, in addition to getting a hold of her pastor, explaining the situation and that she was alive and needed help. Back in Melbourne, her husband was telling everyone that Noella had died in an accident. He then held her funeral on February 22nd of 2015, and as people left her funeral, she stepped right out of the car. Kalala walked up to her, touched her shoulder, and said, "Is it a ghost?" To which she responded, "Surprise, I'm alive," and Kalala just started to profusely apologize. He was then sentenced to prison for 9 years. On my Instagram, there's another case about a man who tried to kidnap his wife. Am I the a-hole for insisting to invite someone to the wedding when my fiancé is against it? I'm 26 male, and my fiancé who I'm getting married to is also 26 female. I started dating my fiancé 4 years ago, and we got engaged last year. Before I met my fiancé, I was friends with this one girl since we were 16 years old. We weren't that close, but we were good friends. I went no contact with that girl after she had cursed out my fiancé multiple times, and when she was acting jealous over the fact that I had a relationship, and also going on dates with my partner. She was getting really exhausting, and I felt suffocated by her. So I cut her off, but this was almost 2.5, 3 years ago. Now, this girl started dating my cousin 3 months ago. My cousin will be invited to the wedding, and although I'm not thrilled about it, that girl will be his +1. My fiancé is totally against it because that girl treated her horribly, and she doesn't want her at her wedding because she believes that kind of person will make the wedding about herself. She's not totally wrong. The girl is extremely weird and capable of pulling a stunt to get all eyes on her, whether it's negative or positive attention. I get why my fiancé is worried, but I don't want to tell my cousin not to bring his +1, who's also his girlfriend. So am I in the wrong here? I'm completely embarrassed to show this to you guys, but my dad has this artificial Elvis head. And if you look at it and you get the creeps like I do, you might be experiencing Uncanny Valley. So because we know what humans look like so well, the closer something becomes it but isn't quite it, the more the mistakes are glaringly obvious. That's why things like Pixar and cartoon characters tend to look more human to us, and also just seem a lot more full of life. Our brains just accept these caricatures easier. We get a similar sensation from wax figures and also badly done taxidermy, as well as animals. In the live-action Avatar, you can see that Appa has his eyes facing forward, but bisons in real life have their eyes on the sides of their head. And because no other facial features on his face change, this put us right on the Uncanny Valley chart. And even when we look at stealth towers, which are cell towers that are supposed to be disguised as something else like a tree, it actually brings more attention to itself than a cell tower. Animators and creators seem to battle this concept a lot, so where else have we seen it? Film creators and game designers have to constantly battle the Uncanny Valley effect. In the early test screenings of the film Shrek, the original character of Princess Fiona caused anxiety in children in response to seeing her on screen. She was simply too lifelike, and a lot of the children started crying. So based on this feedback, they had to totally reanimate her. Many people reported feeling uneasy seeing the 2019 film Cats, just because of the mix of human-like and cat-like movements. And I've heard a lot of people say that they get the same feeling from Cat in the Hat, as well as the Polar Express. I was also looking at some of the potential looks for the Sims 5 characters, and I noticed that even they are going a less realistic route so that they don't come too close to Uncanny Valley. At least that's what I'm assuming. This was also making me think of the AI robot Sophia who went viral. She was giving a lot of people the creeps, even though social robots are supposed to be a very common thing soon to take care of the sick or the elderly and provide therapy. But what exactly is it that causes these bad gut feelings? Is it possible that we developed a sense to be scared of things that are human-like because something used to be a threat that was human-like? Truthfully, I don't know. This is just one of many theories. Some other possible explanations can include ambiguity, Human characteristics with non-human entities can often terrify audiences, and this gives the sensation of just being creeped out. Also, mismatched elements. Research has shown that people tend to be disturbed when elements that don't normally occur together are combined, like Cat in the Hat. Inconsistencies, kind of like in Maury's example, we can spot the smallest imperfection in something that we know very well. But most likely it is a survival response. A response that's activated with death or disease. Or maybe it's possible that creepy human-like things used to roam the earth. There's also a question about this mannequin either being an actual mannequin or a corpse. If you guys want to hear about that story, head over to my Instagram and go to my Instagram reel. Is it possible that we developed a sense to be scared of things that are human-like because something used to be a threat that was human-like? Truthfully, I don't know. This is just one of many theories. Some other possible explanations can include ambiguity. Human characteristics with non-human entities can often terrify audiences, and this gives the sensation of just being creeped out. Also, mismatched elements. Research has shown that people tend to be disturbed when elements that don't normally occur together are combined, like Cat in the Hat. Inconsistencies, kind of like in Maury's example, we can spot the smallest imperfection in something that we know very well. But most likely it is a survival response. A response that's activated with death or disease. Or maybe it's possible that creepy human-like things used to roam the earth. There's also a question about this mannequin either being an actual mannequin or a corpse. If you guys want to hear about that story, head over to my Instagram and go to my Instagram reels. So I actually don't think that Coraline ever left the other world. I'm going to be sharing some of my favorite Coraline theories with you guys today. So the reason that I think she never went back to the other world is because she can't be seen going back through the tunnel to the real world whenever she first went there. She is only seen going to bed as it fades away and it turns back into the real world. And whenever Coraline finally returns to the real world, she sees her parents trapped in a snow globe. How could this magic have even happened in the real world if it's only there in the other mother's world? After this, the real world seasons seem to change very rapidly. And her neighbors, Miss Spink and Miss Forcible, just happen to have everything that's useful for her in this world. When in the beginning of the movie, she doesn't even interact with them at all. It also is so suspicious to me that the neighbors don't think to call the police whenever her parents are missing, unless they were being controlled by the other mother. The cat also appears to be really doubtful too, like he knows that she's not actually back. And at the very end of the movie, the cat actually disappears behind the pink palace sign, showing they're still there. Okay, so back to another Coraline theory. I am pretty sure that the well was another portal to the other world. Whenever Coraline meets Wybie for the first time, he tells her that if she falls to the bottom of the well, she can look up and see a sky full of stars even in the daytime. Something very representative of the other world is that it is night all the time. And whenever Coraline first sees this well, it has a ring of mushrooms around it, which is obviously representative of a fairy ring, which is definitely not a good thing if you stand in the middle of it. You're supposed to do certain rituals if you do accidentally stand in the middle of a fairy ring, because fairy rings are very representative of curses and can lead to a negative outcome. And if this theory is true, that means that at the very end of the movie, whenever Coraline drops the key back down the well, the key would have ended up back with the other mother. Which I also feel like this helps the theory that she never left either, because the other mother is giving her a false sense of succeeding, when in reality, Coraline just trapped herself, which is why the ending just seems way too good to be true. So the entire theme of Coraline has to do with power dynamics, and this power relation between bugs and humans and nature. Of course, as we know, spoiler alert, the other mother is a spider. In European folklore, spiders represent fear, and Freud actually believed that this represented mothers who wanted to devour their children out of possessiveness or guilt. Does this sound familiar at all? And it is kind of alluded that the other mother is contacted through Coraline dreaming. Even Coraline's hair clip is representative of the devil's darning needles, which is what dragonflies represent in European folklore. And it was said that they would poke out eyes or sew the mouth shut of naughty children. And doesn't this sound familiar whenever Wybie had to have his mouth sewed? Whenever he was disobeying the other mother? And poking eyes just like the button eyes. But there's so many more questions that I have, like who exactly is the other mother? How did she get there? Is she the real enemy of the story, or was Coraline set up? I made a whole YouTube video talking way more in depth on Coraline conspiracies.